But while we're waiting for more people to come on in, we can get started with preliminaries. And I suppose first on the preliminaries, ladies and gentlemen, how many of you actually do have eye clickers? For how many of you will or actually be able to participate in this attempt to add interactivity to the lecture and make it a little bit less lecture-ish? I'm hoping for a number above 100. No, it doesn't look like we're going to make it. Okay. Too bad. Yay, okay. It helps us, it helps me gain a sense of where the class is, and I think it also helps you if you have and if you use your eye clickers. Simply because it helps you pay more attention, it kind of knocks you out of the kind of zoning out kind of state of mind. I at least am one of those parents who has thought that it's been a lot better that my children and the people in their cohort have been using computers in the same context when my cohort was simply watching TV. Watching TV is an incredibly passive and zoning out medium, while whatever you're doing on the computer, you're reacting. Even if you're just playing Halo, let alone medieval Total War, let alone other things. There's a certain amount of interaction and response there that I think is very good for the brain, and that applies to you people as well, even though your brains are now almost entirely formed. So I encourage you to get them, because there are real extra credit points associated. We continue to wage our war against the waitlist, and so I want to figure out what the current state is of people coming who are either planning on dropping or who are still on the waitlist, who haven't managed to get themselves off of the waitlist yet. So if you could go to your eye clickers and if you could start clicking away. Okay, that's going to be about our maximum. What are we doing? Okay, so we still got 9 people who are here, but want to take this class if they can get on the waitlist. And the last I looked, we still had 12 seats. So I suspect your problem now is you're trying to get into a section that's full, so try to get into some other section that isn't full, and then go and beg Dariush for permission to attend a section you can attend, even though you actually can't make the section that the bureaucracy thinks that you're enrolled in, and hopefully everything will work out. Hopefully. And here we were as of yesterday lunch, 14 available seats, 20 on the wait list. That should be manageable, especially because one of the consequences of having a university that's not offering enough classes in large enough rooms is that once you're into a class, that basically only death can force you to drop it before the absolute last minute. That is, everyone knows that if they're in a class and if they drop it, they won't be able to get back in with high probability, so even if there's only a 5% chance that you want to take a class, you're going to stay in there until the last drop deadline and only then drop it, which makes it extremely difficult for those of us up here to figure out how many of the people occupying seats in the class actually want to take it. If this were the economics of transition or this were comparative economic systems, we'd then go into a song and dance about how this is one of the inevitable defects of central planning systems. That it's impossible to set them up in such a way that people have incentives to truthfully reveal what they really want to do and what is going on. And this is one of the great excellences of markets. That is, if you don't want to buy it, you don't buy it. If you don't want to sell it at the current market price, you don't sell it. Market systems are very good at getting people to truthfully reveal what they think and what they want in a way that other more bureaucratized, more centrally planning systems are not. And we're dealing with that. And I think that's probably the reason that the waitlist hasn't cleared completely by now, but we'll see. We also say that we have a bunch of Haas majors in this course. And let me warn you again, this is really probably not the right course for you. That is, it doesn't teach you enough about a bunch of things that you ought to learn if you're a Haas major taking a macroeconomics course. It doesn't teach you enough about financial markets in the business cycle. It doesn't teach you about risk return and how they vary over the business cycle. It doesn't teach you about how the cost of capital shifts over the business cycle. We aren't going to do anything about markups and margins in the business cycle, unless April comes around and I happen to be working on a markups paper, which I might be. It don't teach enough about demand, productivity, and costs and how the business cycle affects firms' production decisions. Those are all things that Haas majors ought to know. We don't do that. We're going to be doing more political economy and public policy-ish stuff with occasional excursions into sociology. You'd be better served in the counterpart Haas course. Now, I realize that schedules are complicated and that's not possible, but I really don't think this is the right place or the best place for you to be. But then I'm also an economist, and as economists, we know that people can't always do the first best, that everyone is trying to optimize under constraints. And economists also strongly believe in individual autonomy, on the grounds that you are probably better judges of your own self-interest than I am, at least unless I want to peek deeply into the situation. But at least think about it. Sections, we now have 3 Monday, 2 Wednesday, and 1 Thursday section, correct? And are these all in the right spaces after we finished moving everything around? I think they are. Here's where our sections are. And problem set 1, as I said, it was up on the web. It's due on Thursday at the start of lecture. And as I said last time, it's a combination listen to lecture and data scavenger hunt problem set. It ought to be easy to do. Now a little recall from last time. That I tried to pound one number into your heads about the magnitude of economic growth that we've seen since the invention of agriculture, since the days 10,000 years ago when we really stopped being hunters and gatherers, settled down, started farming and herding, and thus truly acquired the ability to build up lots of physical capital. We could build houses that we would then use more or less constantly, and also lots more knowledge capital, it being a lot easier to remember things if you aren't moving around. Okay, and we're now up at 62% at what I think the right answer is. But, the people who want to say it's very difficult to compare what our standards of living are to those of, say, Gilgamesh, king of Uruk in 5000 BC, there's a strong point. To that. Now back on to what we're going to be talking about today, which is the long-run evolution of important macroeconomic indicators. And what do you think we're going to talk about today? What do you think the most important macroeconomic indicator is going to be? Which of these am I going to start with? These are all things that are among the list of 6 key macroeconomic quantities in the textbook. Which of these do you think is the most? Okay. Yep, real GDP. Real GDP is it. It's the thing we look at most. If there's one single economic statistic that we want you to remember, it's going to be real GDP. It's our single consensus most used overall measure of economic activity. And in the third quarter of 2007, real GDP was $14.1799 trillion at an annual rate here in the United States, composed of consumption spending, investment spending by businesses, including an involuntary increase in inventories that businesses really didn't want to see in the third quarter of 2007, and that then led them to fire people because they were producing a little bit more than they could sell, government purchases, and then this huge honking negative net exports term because we were spending a lot more than we were kind of producing in the United States in the third quarter of 2007. We're doing the same today. And this GDP is our best single measure of the circular flow of economic activity, the process by which households buy things from businesses, and as they spend money, they get their cash over to businesses, and the businesses then use the cash that households have spent in order to pay their workers, in order to pay their material suppliers, in order to pay for rent and for capital and for entrepreneurship and for profits, and that flow of incomes back to the households then gets the households back the incomes they then need to go and buy their next round of purchases. And the whole economy holds together in one gigantic circular flow. Back in 1803, back at the start of the modern age, there were a number of people who were worried that this circular flow could break down. That we were no longer in a world in which people largely made what their own households consumed and traded a little bit. Instead, pretty much everything was being traded. Indeed, maybe 5% of what I consume is something that I make myself, and most of that is just scrambling eggs, I must say, and other related things. The extraordinary divergence between the 5% of the stuff I consume that I make and the perhaps 80% of the stuff they consumed that they made when you go back only about 6 generations in my ancestor tree is an absolutely amazing statement of the economic changes of the past 3 centuries. Back in 1803, people were worried that the system might break down, and economist Jean-Baptiste Say, in Refuge from the rather sharp guillotinesque tenor of French politics and Refuge in the Countryside, said you don't have to worry about that. Since nobody makes unless you plan to use or sell, and nobody sells unless you plan to buy, total planned sales must be equal to total planned spending. There can be excess supply of some particular commodities, but if there's excess demand for others, and the people who are making the commodities that are in excess supply then have a big incentive to hot-foot it over to the industries that are expanding where there's excess demand, get themselves retrained, and start making something that consumers actually want to buy. And so we don't have to worry about the whole system not holding together. Jean-Baptiste Say's claim sounds a little hollow today when you look outside, especially if you're a senior contemplating a job search right now, in a U.S. economy where the unemployment rate is still close to 10%. And indeed, John Stuart Mill, a generation after 1803, pointed out the potential problem with Say's law, that people don't just buy currently produced goods and services with their incomes, they buy and sell financial assets as well. And you can have an excess supply of pretty much every single currently produced good or service, and an excess supply of labor in the economy, if there's a big excess demand for cash, for bonds, for safe assets, for any of these financial things. And then it's the responsibility of the government to try to strategically intervene in financial markets to make sure that even if Say's law is false in theory, it's true in practice, or true enough in practice that we can go forward and keep our market economy running. With that as GDP, what it is and why we're focusing on it, it's time to move on to the introduction to economic growth. First, the second number I want you all to have in your heads right now. That if I want, first of all, you to be able to say that world real GDP today is something like 14,000 times greater than it was at the invention of agriculture, with lots of asterisks about the difficulty or perhaps the silliness of making these calculations. What's the unemployment rate? Yes, 80. Okay, yes. People are converging. Okay. Mm-hmm. A fun thing to do with these clickers is to put up the graph and leave things open, and then see if you can get people to converge in the wrong answer via herd behavior. When this works, this is an absolutely devastatingly powerful point to make during a bubble lecture about how is it that financial markets can grossly overvalue something. In the classroom, it's hard to make it work. Somehow it's easier to get people to converge to the wrong answer when they're actually trading their own money on the stock market than when they're clicking in a classroom. I want the seasonally adjusted answer. I want the 9.4% for the December unemployment rate rather than the 9.1%, which was the seasonally unadjusted answer. The actual unemployment rate that the current population survey interviewers reported, because we do know that Christmas comes every year, and a lot of people are hired to work retail near Christmas and also to staff all the extra UPS trucks. And so we know that during the survey week, during the second week of the month of December, that about an extra 3/10 proportion of the labor force will be at work simply because it's the Christmas season. Okay. So now for the next couple of weeks, we're going to kind of drop the business cycle stuff, drop the unemployment stuff. Come back to it in 2.5 weeks from now. But we're going to assume for the next couple of weeks that Say's law works, or at least it works right now, or at least the central bank and the Treasury make it work well enough in practice, even though it's false in theory. And we're going to say, suppose we don't have to worry about problems of there not being enough demand out there in the economy for people to have the money to buy the things that are being made that people are trying to sell. Suppose you don't have any demand problems. Then what determines an economy's level of real GDP? And we're going to call that real GDP now and for the rest of the course by this big symbol, capital Y. Supposedly Y stands for income, because income is about going to be the same as production by the circular flow principle, and they couldn't use I for income because they were already using I for investment. Doesn't seem to me to be an especially well thought out system of notation. Nevertheless, it's the one we have. Y stands for income. And we're going to be focusing for the next 2 weeks on 3 big questions. Why is the world so much richer? Why are countries so much richer today than they were 50 or 100 years ago? And what are our prospects for increasing riches in the future? And also, why is the world today so unequal as we look across countries? As I said last time, I think I said this last time, I do answer this phone once from any number I don't recognize, which means that there are 2 billion people in the world who could call me if they think I had something to say that would help them understand how to become richer or how to live their lives, and yet remarkably few people do, in spite of the fact that there are an enormous number of people here in Berkeley and elsewhere on the worldwide communications net who will answer the questions. And in any event, even if you have an engineering degree from a middle-ranking engineering university, there are enough books out there to give you access to at least all of human technology up to a generation ago, back when we were maybe 25% poorer than we are now. The world's remarkably close in communication and in trade, and yet it's also almost the most unequal world we've ever seen in terms of income and productivity levels. And we're going to think about these questions by doing something that economists tend to do, which is to start with an incredibly complicated issue and ruthlessly simplify it down to 2 or 3 or sometimes 1 important aspect of it. To simply throw almost all of the real-world complications away, to focus like a laser on a very small set of important factors, and then to try to write down a simple model, usually a mathematical model, a simple system that will allow you to understand how these different important factors interact and produce the results we see in the world. The idea is we make an intellectual bet that we're going to write down a grossly oversimplified model of the world, and we're going to find an exact solution to it. And we're going to hope that our exact solution to this grossly oversimplified model world will carry information about how the complicated real world behaves. And this is inherently a dialectical process. We might write down the wrong model. We might get our conclusions and say, that makes no sense, we need to go back and adjust it. We might take a look at the conclusions of the model and at the world and might say, are we misunderstanding the world? Maybe the model has something else to tell us that we hadn't previously recognized. It's a dynamic process. We economists think it's a very useful process. There are other people elsewhere in the university, they're usually called sociologists and historians, who don't think it's a terribly useful process. And right now, political scientists are undergoing an interdisciplinary struggle and crisis of conscience over whether this is a useful process or not, whether it means understanding or whether it reduces it. But we're economists, and this is what we do. So I'm going to try to write down a model of the determinants of real GDPY, and I'm going to be looking at a full employment or a normal employment case in which we don't have to worry about any significant shortages of demand in the economy. And I'm going to simply assert that then the level of real GDPY, and also the level of real GDP per worker in the economy, Y over L, Y real GDP divided by the labor force L, that's going to be determined by technology, including organization, by how efficiently we use our labor in this economy, given the technology that we know and also the things about organization that we've built up over the past 10 centuries, about how to run organizations, and resources. And right now, we're just going to talk about labor and capital. Hands and brains on the one hand, machines that we've built to make our hands and brains more effective on the other, and then structures to keep the rain off the machines so things don't rust. Later on, we're going to want to add in natural resources as well, but at the moment, let's just do technology and organization on the one hand, and resources defined as labor and capital on the other. And we're also going to be talking about cumulative processes, about processes of compound growth. Situations in which the economy grows by, say, 3% in 1 year, and then because it's on its balanced growth path, and because new technologies are being discovered, and because new buildings are being built and new machines are getting installed, it can then turn around and do the same growth thing again in the next year. So we have cumulative processes that build on each other. And here, refreshing a little arithmetic in your minds is, I think, useful. Suppose you have a process growing at 1% per year. How long does whatever's growing at 1% per year take to double? No, not 1%. Let's do 4%. Suppose you have a process growing at 4% per year. How long does some quantity that's growing at 4% per year take to double? Okay. All right, we're coming in on the wire. We have 7 more seconds to put your guess. 2, 1. Display. 18 years. 18 years is the right answer. 25 years, it would have sense if it wasn't compounding. If it wasn't the fact that the economy is larger in 10 years than it is now, means that the same rate of growth in 10 years will actually add more in GDP than 4% growth adds to GDP now. Answer E is a reasonably honorable one, at least. B and D are things I don't, that are hard to get as answers out to this particular question, unless you say, well, it's got to be less than 25 years, but I'm not quite sure how much. Let's work through this. Let's multiply it out. We start with our quantity at 1. After a year, it's at 1.04. After 4 years, it's almost at 1.17. Why is it nearly at 1.17 after 4 years rather than 1.16? Well, because it's bigger in years 2 and 3 than it was at year 0. Applying the same 4% growth rate to years 2 and 3 produces a greater increment than the 0.04 increment we got moving from year 0 to year 1. We can then continue to multiply it out, and we see that after 17 years, we're at 1.947, and after 18, we cross 2. We're at 2.0258. While if we were just adding 0.04 to our quantity for each of those 18 years, we'd be 1.72. So the compound interest matters. The compound interest matters because it adds almost half again to the amount of growth. It adds, say, 30 to the 72 worth of growth that you'd have had otherwise. That's why we go through this, because even in relatively short periods of time, when you have a cumulative compounding process, the fact that it's compounding matters. All right, suppose we have 6% per year instead of 4% per year for our growth rate. How long will something growing at 6% per year take to double? Will it be slightly different numbers this time? Will it be 18? Will it be 12? Will it be 6? Will it be 50? Or do you want to give up and say it's too complicated to do in your head under these particular conditions? B, 12. Okay, B is excellent. B is good. 12 is right. And we don't need to multiply it out, but we do need to notice something. We were talking about a doubling, an increase by 100%. We had a 4% and a 6% growth rate. A 4% growth rate doubled in 18 years. A 6% growth rate doubled in 12 years. What you do is you take 72, you divide it by the growth rate in percent per year. That's how long it takes to double, roughly and approximately. That's the rule of 72. 3 things to notice about the rule of 72. First, it works for having to. After all, a quantity shrinking at 4 by 4% per year will have itself after 18 years. Second, it's only approximate. It's not exact. Third, I want you to have it drilled into your heads. That is, I want you to leave this course being able to say that a quantity growing at X% will double in 72 divided by X years. But that's a genuinely useful life skill to have, not that it makes you popular at parties,